Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Washington on this wonderful April afternoon in 1865. As you know, it's been a very difficult 4 years in our country, but as I'm sure you're also aware, we've recently received some very good news here in Washington, and so we are especially pleased to have you with us. We welcome you to the Executive Mansion, and we invite you to stay and spend an evening with Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln.
Do I understand correctly that most of you good people are from the state of Illinois? Well, I suppose I should welcome you to Washington City. Although why anybody would come to Washington if they don't have to is certainly beyond me. But for the first time in 4 years, well, there is actually some good news in this conflict that we're engaged in. But I will warn you right now, we have a very difficult time ahead of us, and quite frankly, sometimes I'm very tired. I was telling Mrs. Lincoln during our carriage ride the other afternoon that maybe, well, after this term of office, we'll travel, we'll see Europe. I certainly know that's something she'd like very much to do. I have always wanted to visit the Holy Land. Perhaps we can do that. Of course, I suppose I could go back to Springfield and start my law practice again. Springfield is, well, kind of where it all started for us, you know. Now, I removed to Springfield in 1837, and it was 2 years later at a cotillion I first met Mary Todd. I'll tell you, I thought she was about the prettiest gal in the world. As a matter of fact, till this very day, I can remember the first words that I ever said to her. Miss Todd, I'd like to dance with you in just about the worst way.
And he certainly did dance in the worst way. Mr. Lincoln, after all this time, must I still remind you it is very bad manners to receive guests in your shirt sleeves?
Now, Mother, I'm in my own office.
And stocking feet?
I'm in my own office at the end of the day with some folks from Illinois, and I see absolutely no reason whatsoever to get into an argument with you.
It was plain to see from the start that this tall, young backwoods lawyer had almost none of the social graces that I was accustomed to in my beaux. Still, there was something about him that I found most appealing. His gentleness, his strength. I also sensed that he might very well have a great political career ahead of him, and that was important to me too, for I've always been interested in politics, thanks to my father. And he certainly seemed to need someone to take care of him.
Well, I can tell you her brother-in-law and sister didn't quite see it that way.
Well, now, you have to understand that I came from a very wealthy and socially prominent family in Lexington, Kentucky. I'd moved to Springfield to visit my sister Elizabeth and her husband, Mr. Ninian W. Edwards, who was one of the leaders of Springfield society at the time. Since I was living in their home, this of course made them my guardians, and they therefore felt that it was their responsibility to either approve or disapprove of any young man who might wish to court me. Well, they soon made it clear that they did not approve of Mr. Lincoln. They felt that I would be marrying beneath my station.
Well, I was certainly aware of the fact that I didn't have much to offer a woman as far as social position, financial security, even prospects for that matter. As I'd already told one woman who thought she might be inclined to marry me, you better not do it. Well, no, you see, my logic is I'd rather be miserable myself than to make the woman I love miserable because she married me. And so on that fatal 1st of January in 1841, I broke off my engagement with Mary, although neither one was very pleased about it. Eventually, friends got us back together again, and on November the 4th of 1842, we decided that whether the Edwardses liked it or not, we were going to be married.
Faced with that ultimatum, Elizabeth and Ninian finally relented, and that very evening we were married in the parlor of their home. Now, on such short notice, you can well imagine that the preparations were rather hurried. In fact, I seem to remember that the wedding cake was still warm when we served it. Mr. Lincoln had inscribed a ring with the words, "Love is eternal." But words cannot express the happiness and pride I felt as he placed the ring on my finger.
As I was to tell a friend of mine, Well, some few days later, well, there's nothing new here. Oh, except my marrying, which to me is still a matter of profound wonder.
Oh, dear, Mr. Lincoln.
Our first home was over the Globe Tavern in Springfield, which I admit to you is not much of a place to bring a new wife, but, well, the rent was affordable. It was $4 a week. In fact, our first son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was born there, but we scrimped and saved, and by 1844, we were able to buy our own home at the corner of 8th and Jackson. In fact, it's the only home we've ever owned. And just in time, because within 2 years, our second son, Edward, was born. Back then, I earned a living as a lawyer. I traveled the old 8th Judicial Circuit twice a year, spring and fall, and, well, being a circuit riding lawyer means you go from county seat to county seat, hearing cases, drawing up legal papers, things of that nature, but after work, there was nothing we liked better than entertain ourselves. I recall one evening down in Danville, there was Judge Davis, Leonard Sweat, and myself asked to sing. Got through the song quite well, I thought, but I did notice all the lawyers went to the back of the room and had a meeting, and they came back with a somewhat startling announcement. They said, "Abraham Lincoln, you have a voice that is well worth paying for, not to sing." Speaking of Judge Davis is probably the sternest judge we ever had on the old circuit. I recall we had a young man brought up on charges of theft from one of our local merchants, and the judge looked at him very sternly and goes, "Patty, don't you know that you cannot go through this life stealing things? Everything you steal in this lifetime, you will pay for on Judgment Day." Well, Patty thought about it for a moment. He says, "Your Honor, if I had known my credit was that darn good, I might have taken something else." Speaking of taking things, I defended a young man brought up on charges of theft from one of our local doctors. The judge says, "How do you plead, young man?" "Not guilty, Your Honor, and for medical reasons." The judge said, "I'd like to know a possible medical reason there could be for stealing anything." Young man says, "It's quite simple, Your Honor." Says, "For the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been feeling kind of poorly. I went to the doctor examined me, and when he got through with his examination, says, 'You know, you do look bad. I believe you should take something for it.'" Said the only thing worth taking was this watch, so that's what I took. But if I'm going to tell stories to the other judges and lawyers, I probably should tell a story myself. I was coming out of the Capitol building one afternoon, and a very attractive young lady, well, such as yourself, she walks up to me, she says, "Mr. Lincoln, you are without a doubt the ugliest man I've ever seen in my entire life." Well, I'm kind of like Patty. I had to think about it for a moment. I said, "Perhaps you're right about that, ma'am, but I'm afraid there is nothing I can do about it." To which she very quickly replied, "Well, you know, you could do us the courtesy of staying indoors." Sometimes, when the pressures of being the president are almost more than I can tolerate, I wish I was back out on the circuit. I admit to you, for the most part, it was somewhat mundane, but occasionally there would be moments of, "Yes, Mother."
While Mr. Lincoln was out traveling the circuit with the other attorneys, things were very difficult for me back home in Springfield. You see, having come from a family where servants did all of the menial chores, it was quite an adjustment for me to have to do all the cooking and cleaning myself. Although I did so rather well, and of course I never minded doing the shopping myself. I've always enjoyed shopping. However, most women in Springfield had their husbands at home to chop wood or fetch water for them. In my husband's absence, I had to either do these chores myself or pay someone to do them for me. And we had very little money in those days. It was also my responsibility to care for our growing family, 4 boys in all, almost entirely by myself since Mr. Lincoln was gone so much of the time. Now, Mr. Lincoln and I always like to let the children have fun. But sometimes those boys could be quite a handful.
Now, I would be the first one to admit to you that, well, anytime I was home off the circuit, there was nothing I liked better than to take the boys up to my law office with me. But I also have to admit to you that my law partner, Billy Herndon, would probably have liked to throw those little codgers out the window on more than one occasion, I'm afraid. But I truly enjoyed having the boys around.
I think Mr. Herndon is the one who should have been thrown out the window.
As I was saying, I truly enjoyed having the boys around when I was home off the circuit.
Aside from Mr. Lincoln's frequent and often lengthy absences from home, we had what was considered a normal family life in Springfield at the time. Now, we had our disagreements and problems, same as any other young married couple. In particular, Mr. Lincoln used to come home sometimes in just the blackest fits of what he called the hypo. Didn't seem to be anything I could do to get him out of it. Why, he would sit there sometimes and brood for hours on end, and sometimes I would try to provoke an argument with him just to get him to talk to me. But most of the time I just felt hurt and humiliated by his apparent indifference towards me and the children. Mr. Lincoln, what have I done wrong? Even a common criminal has the right to know of what crime he is accused before he can be convicted, so tell me, what did I do?
You haven't done anything wrong, Mary.
Then why don't you love me anymore?
Mary, I do love you. Now, why on earth would you ask a question like that?
Because I have to ask myself that question every time you stay out on the circuit longer than you have to. When you don't come home on weekends, even though you could. When weeks and months go by that I receive no letter or even a message from you. And when you are at home, it's as if you're not really here at all. You're off in some little world of your own somewhere, and your behavior is most alarming. You sit staring off into space for hours at a time and then just jump up and walk out of the house without saying a word to anyone. You look right through people, don't even see them. Why, just the other day you were pulling Willie in the wagon behind you as you walked down the street. And he fell out of the wagon, started screaming, the whole neighborhood came running out, but you never heard him. You were all the way down the street before you even realized he was gone. Where in the world does your own mind go that you don't even notice when your child falls out of the wagon?
All right, Mary, all right. But don't go scolding me. Now, sometimes you make this house intolerable yourself.
I make the house intolerable?
Indeed you do.
You are making my life intolerable. Don't you think I know how people are gossiping about us behind my back?
What?
Some people are saying that I drive you away with my sharp tongue and bad temper. Others are saying, I can't even repeat what other people are suggesting. What am I supposed to say to Robert when he asks why the other lawyers come home and his father doesn't? Should I tell him that we need the money more than they do? Or should I just tell him that the lawyers and clients on the circuit are more important to you than we are?
Mary, I suppose I owe you an apology. I just never knew it had this effect on you. Now, you've got to believe me, this is not your fault.
Then what is it?
It's just that when I'm out on the circuit, there's all the activity of the court. There's, the hustle and bustle of the trial. There are young lawyers asking me for advice. I feel like I'm gaining, some measure of success. But when I come home, I look around and I realize what a failure I've been. Mary, you could have had your choice of men. Now look at Stephen Douglas. Look how far he's gone in politics, and I've come up short. The truth is, Mary, sometimes I do feel like I've let you down, and it makes it very difficult to have to come home and face you.
It's true I had my choice of men, Mr. Lincoln, including Stephen Douglas. But I chose you because I sensed greatness in you, and I've never considered you a failure. Political fortunes change all the time, you know that, and your time is coming, I'm sure of it. Now, maybe things don't look very good right now, but I have faith in you. All I ask is that you not shut me out of your life like this. Let me share your struggles as well as your triumphs. Why, I believe that you could become President of the United States someday if you wanted to, Abraham Lincoln.
You just never give up on me, do you, Mary?
Never.
I admit to a bit of a puzzlement, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you know my wife's family, the Todds, very prominent family from the state of Kentucky. I have always wondered why the Todds take two D's to spell their name. Well, think about it for a moment. Almighty God only needs one. Well, more and more my political career was beginning to be less and less satisfying. Now, it is true I served one term as a representative of the Whig Party from the state of Illinois. I've been very active in the campaign of Zachary Taylor for president, but more and more it began to appear to me that my loyalty and my hard work for my party were going unrewarded. And my political career being what it was, there were some things at home that needed more of my attention, some of great happiness and some of great sorrow. In the year 1850, our son Edward passed away. He wasn't quite 4 years old at the time. It's also about this time that both my father and Mary's father passed away. But in December of 1850, our third son William was born. And 3 years later, our youngest son Thomas. We named him Thomas as an honor to my father, but we nicknamed him Ted because, well, when he was born, his head was so big, he looked just like a tadpole as far as I was concerned. Oh, from 1849 till 1854, I gave up any interest in politics, devoted all my time and energy to my family and to my somewhat successful law practice. But in 1854, with the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, I was right back in the political fray again. Now, you all remember, ever since the days of President Jefferson, all of the land that we originally called the Louisiana Territory, we had tried to prevent the spread of slavery. Of course, as states began to be formed from this territory, some of those states requested they be allowed to have slavery. So in 1820, we had passed what we call the Missouri Compromise. It had said, in effect, that any state being formed north of a certain degree of latitude, 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude to be exact, would enter this union as a free state. Any state being formed south of that line, if they so chose, could become a slave state. Seemed to be a fairly good compromise between the two sections of the country. Obviously, each had yielded something it wanted, and yet each had gained something it desired. But in 1854, Senator Douglas introduced what he called the Kansas-Nebraska Bill, which declared the Missouri Compromise as inoperative, and according to his theory, the settlers out in the territory, regardless of where they were located, should have the right to decide whether or not to have slavery. To me, that was a blatant attempt to allow slavery to cross over into territory where it had been legally prohibited for years. Now, do not misunderstand me. In a state where it legally existed, there wasn't much I could do about it. But I could be vehemently opposed to the further spread of it. And of course, those of us who were opposed to the spread of slavery in the territory would be dealt a very severe blow 3 years later in 1857 in what I suppose will become known as the Dred Scott decision. In 1857, the Supreme Court declared that Dred Scott is one, a Negro, secondly, a slave, and for these two reasons was not a citizen of the United States, could never become a citizen of the United States. Therefore, he had no right to be suing for his freedom in the courts of the United States. And furthermore, at least according to the Supreme Court, our Congress could not pass any law that would prohibit his master from taking him into any territory he so desired. They had just said, in effect, we cannot stop the spread of slavery in this nation. My opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision became very well known. They were so well known that the next year, in 1858, there was a newly formed political party in the state of Illinois called the Republican Party. And they asked me to run for the United States Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, who had held the health office for 2 terms, very popular, very powerful senator. The late summer, early fall of 1858, Senator Douglas and I were involved in what I suppose would become known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates, or as Judge Douglas always called them, the Douglas-Lincoln debates. A lot of things we probably should have and we could have discussed, but it seemed the only thing that people really wanted to hear about was the question of slavery, or more exactly, the question of the spread of slavery on which obviously we were so diametrically opposed. In the fall of '58, the state of Illinois did not get a new senator. Senator Douglas was reelected. But because of the debates in 1858, when the Republican Party met in Chicago in 1860, they asked me to run for president against John Bell, John Breckinridge, and the senator from the state of Illinois, Stephen A. Douglas. On November the 6th, 1860, it became my great honor to be elected the 16th president of these United States. But even before I could take the oath of office, we had trouble brewing in our country. Immediately upon my election, the great state of South Carolina chose to secede from our union, followed shortly by the states of Georgia and Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and of course, as you well know, they have formed what they call the Confederate States of America. They've elected their own leader, Jefferson Davis. I will tell you that some 4 years ago, I was somewhat hopeful that a confrontation could be avoided, but more and more it began to appear that, well, just too many people were bound and determined that we were going to have a confrontation.
It seems so strange after so many years to be packing up all of our belongings, moving our family away to Washington. 17 years we lived in that house at the corner of 8th and Jackson. There were a lot of happy memories in that house. Some sad ones, too. We felt sad, of course, to be leaving our friends, our neighbors, the town that we lived in for so many years. But quite naturally, we were excited and happy about the presidency. I was very proud of my husband, but I was also frightened for his safety, for there had been threats and rumors that he would be murdered before he could even get to Washington. Naturally, fearing for his safety as I did, I would have preferred to accompany him on the journey. However, it was decided best for security reasons that Mr. Lincoln would leave first on one train, the children and I would follow on another. The morning of Mr. Lincoln's departure was rainy and cold. But in spite of the dismal weather, a large crowd of well-wishers had gathered at the Great Western Railway station to see him off.
My friends, no one not in my situation can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and to the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Here I have lived for a quarter of a century, and I have passed from a young to an old man. Here my children are born, and here one is now buried. I now leave not knowing when or whether ever I shall return, with a task before me greater than that which ever rested upon Washington. Without the assistance of that divine being who ever attended him, I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Trusting in him that can go with me and remain here with you and be all places for good, let us confidently hope that all will yet be well. To his care commending you, as I hope in your prayer you commend me to him, I bid you an affectionate farewell.
When we arrived in Washington, I set about to counteract the image that Washington society seemed to have of the new president and his family. They seemed to think that just because we came from the West, that we had no manners. Some of them even called us uncivilized. Well, I would show them that I have just as much culture as the rest of them. I know just as much about fashionable clothing, stylish decorating, proper etiquette. I even know how to speak French. The opportunity to make a good first impression was not long in coming. Our first inaugural ball took place on March the 4th, 1861. My husband had taken the oath of office that day and had given a speech in which he pleaded for North and South to avoid the conflict. We are not enemies, but friends, he said. We must not be enemies. That evening we gave a grand reception and everything was perfect. I wore a beautiful gown, The food was excellent, and all of the proper protocol was observed. The next day, the newspapers were full of reports of our success at the reception, and I was soon to gain a reputation in Washington as an accomplished hostess. But if we were to do much entertaining at the White House, I would first have to do something about its disgracefully shabby condition. Honestly, some of those furnishings looked as if they had not been replaced since George Washington's time. Well, the carpet was threadbare, the curtains were faded, and there wasn't a china service in the place that could put together more than a dozen complete place settings. I felt this was absolutely unsuitable for the home of the President of the United States. Fortunately, Congress agreed, and they granted an appropriation of $20,000 with which to redecorate the White House. Well, at first I thought that this would be more than enough, but, well, as I'm sure you all know, good quality is not inexpensive, and I did try to take advantage of bargains when I found them. But I'm afraid that when the final bills were tallied, I had overspent my allowance of $20,000 by an additional $6,700. Mr. Lincoln was dreadfully upset when he learned of it.
Mother! What is the meaning of this bill?
Now, Father, please don't be angry. I didn't really mean to spend so much, but it was necessary in order to refurnish this house properly for you.
It was wrong to spend a single cent at a time like this. Now, this house was furnished well enough.
Oh.
It's better than anything we've ever lived in before.
Oh, most certainly not.
Elegant grand carpeting, $2,500? I would like to know where carpeting worth $2,500 is going to be placed, Mary.
Well, if you've looked in the East Room lately, you'll notice the improvement.
I will not
now we can
approve of
receive
bills
it.
like this. I'd rather pay it out of my own pocket first.
Oh, no, Mr. Lincoln, you mustn't do that. We can't afford it. Besides, it's the responsibility of the government to provide for your living quarters. Couldn't Congress pass a deficiency appropriation to make up the difference now? That's been done before, surely.
It would stink in the nostrils of the American people to have it said that the president approved a bill overriding an appropriation of $20,000 for flub dubs for this darned old house.
But, Mr.
Mother,
Lincoln, you don't...
the soldiers in the field do not have enough blankets sometimes.
But, Mr. Lincoln, you don't understand. You see, we have a responsibility to the nation now. It will give the people confidence in the government if they can see that the president is well dressed, the White House is well furnished. It will reassure them that all is well here.
We will do that with our actions, Mary, not with our appearances. Now, the minds and the resources of this country have other priorities at the moment. Mary, I'm going to take care of this bill this time. But in the future, you have got to be more careful with money. Do you understand me?
But, Mr. Lincoln, I really feel that I can serve a purpose here by...
More careful with money.
Yes, Mr. Lincoln.
Well, I have heard it said that whether you get married or not, you're going to regret it. You know, it's almost a bit of an irony, I suppose. It is almost 4 years to the day since the confrontation we all hoped to avoid took place. It was on April the 12th of 1861 that Fort Sumter, which was a federal installation located in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, was fired upon, laid siege to, and, well, 2 days later, it would surrender. The first blow of this terrible Civil War had been struck. It became obvious to me that the use of force could no longer be avoided, and so I called for a volunteer force of 75,000 men to reestablish national authority, and I declared a blockade of all our southern ports. Of course, when I took this action, 4 more states would leave the Union: Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. And it didn't take long for the war to come right up to our doorstep. On July the 21st, 1861, at a place called Bull Run, which is very near Manassas, Virginia, the Union forces engaged the rebel forces. First reports coming back said it'd be a very easy Union victory. Well, by the middle of the afternoon, the rebels received reinforcements, and what was going to be an easy Union victory, in fact, turned into a terrible Union rout. General McDowell's troops came back to Washington. They were demoralized, disillusioned, and in total disarray. I suppose that some 4 years ago, there were a lot of people who thought this war would be over in a few weeks, a few months at the most. But I think suddenly the realization set in. This was going to be a very long and a very difficult struggle. After McDowell's defeat at Bull Run, I started looking around for a general to replace him, and I found a young man named George McClellan. So I brought General McClellan into Washington, gave him command of the Army of the Potomac, and by the end of the year, when General Winfield Scott resigned, I gave him command of the Federal forces. But then I found out some things about General McClellan I was not aware of before. General McClellan had what I call a case of the slows. Oh, don't misunderstand me. General McClellan was an excellent commander when it comes to drills, when it comes to marching, when it comes to parades. And in fact, I do believe we owe him a great deal of gratitude for his ability to organize. But I simply could not get the man to fight. And he was always sending me urgent telegrams. He needed more men. He needed more supplies. He needed more time. The only thing he never asked me for more of was castor oil. And I suppose that would cause him to move much quicker than he was used to. I finally got so aggravated at General McClellan, I sent him a telegram. My dear General, if you're not going to use the Army, would you mind if I used it for a while? Well, mercifully, the year 1861 did come to an end. The year 1862 began. But by now, my cabinet, which was never one big happy family, had to have something done about it. And so I sent our Secretary of War, Cameron, over to Russia to be our ambassador to that country. And I've appointed our present Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton. I suppose if we look back early in 1862, we could call it moderate success out west under General Grant. He'd captured Fort Donelson and Fort Henry out in Tennessee. If in fact we do look back early in 1862, we would also see a personal tragedy that would touch the White House.
I've always had a horror of death, ever since I was a little girl. When I was 6 years old, my mother, whom I adored, had died in childbirth. I remember feeling abandoned, rejected, and utterly desolate. I had tried to bear little Eddie's death in Springfield as a good Christian mother should. But Willie was my favorite, my angel boy. Why? Why was he taken from us? Surely this is God's punishment for our worldliness and our political ambition. Oh, Willie, Willie. He was too good for this earth.
Our son was 11 years old when he passed away of bilious fever. Willie was a very carefree boy. He was easygoing, fun-loving. His mother took his death extremely hard. And although my heart was broken, I had to remain strong, not only for Mary, but for the country. You must believe that that does not ease by a single second the anguish of a parent at the loss of a child. Mother, you cannot remain in this room forever. Our son is gone. Our son is in heaven now, and we must try to get on with our lives somehow.
But Father, Willie comes to visit me. He comes and stands by my bed late at night and smiles at me. That same sweet smile he's always had. And sometimes little Eddie comes with him.
Mother, do you see the large white building across the way? That is a lunatic asylum. Now you must get control of your grief or it is going to drive you mad. And we may have to send you there someday. Shiloh, 23,000. The Wilderness, 25,000. Antietam, 26,000. Chancellorsville, 30,000. The list of the battles of this Civil War, they are long and they are bloody. Each day brings more reports of more fighting. Each day brings more reports of more loss of life. Some of them we call Union victories. Some of them they call Confederate. With so much loss of life, it's difficult to say who wins or who loses. I sometimes believe that in war, there is no victory. There's no defeat. There is only death. My heart goes out to the mothers, the fathers, the families on both sides of this conflict, north and south, for the loss of their sons and the loss of their loved ones. However, as the President of these United States, I am firm in my conviction this union must be preserved. And so this war has continued. I would hope that if history marks me well, it will allow that there are three sets of principles that guide my life, both private and public. The first set of principles are found within our Declaration of Independence, where we declared that we believe that all men are created equal. The second set of principles are found within our Constitution, where we strive to form a more perfect union. And in fact, there is a third set of principles. They're found in the pages of a book, one single book entitled the Holy Bible. I believe that any nation founded upon the principles within this book will endure forever. Sadly, I also believe that any nation that abandons these principles is in fact destined to perish. You know, of course, I'm not a member of any particular denomination, but I have never denied the truth of the Scriptures, and I hope I've never shown disrespect to religion in general, or to any group of Christians in particular. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace. For all of our moderate success early in '62, by the middle of the summer, I came to the conclusion we were going to lose the war. Militarily, we were at the end of our rope. It was either change our tactics or we're going to lose this conflict. It's quite that simple for me. So, after many hours of anguish alone, without even talking to my cabinet, I made a most difficult decision. I decided upon a new policy. I decided upon a policy of emancipation. Now, of course, being from Illinois, you know quite well that I am opposed to slavery. I have always been opposed to slavery. In fact, if slavery is not wrong, there could be nothing wrong in this entire world. But even as the President of the United States, I do not have the power, I do not have the authority to interfere with this peculiar institution in a state where it's legally adopted. As this war has drug on, it's become not only a moral issue for me, but a military necessity. I am quite convinced if the rebels are going to say that slaves are property, as they do, then militarily it is perfectly valid that we confiscate that property. I called my cabinet together. I read the preliminary proclamation to them. The preliminary proclamation said, in effect, that any person held as a slave within any state or designated part of any state, not back in this union on January the 1st of 1863, would then and thenceforward forever be free. You know the results. The rebels totally ignored me. They don't think I've got anything to say to them anyway. Anything I do say goes in one ear and out the other as far as they're concerned. But we have come to a point in our history that I did not dream I would live to see. Our Congress has ratified, and sent to the states to be ratified, a 13th Amendment to our Constitution. This amendment, when ratified by a sufficient number of states, will do exactly that. It will rid our nation of the cancer of slavery that has lived on it since its birth. And being from Illinois, I think you should have a great deal of pride in the fact the state of Illinois was indeed the very first state to ratify the 13th Amendment, 15 minutes after she received it. Now, having told you that, I'm obliged to stand here and tell you that it's certainly in large part my fault that this war has lasted as long as it has. I have been unable to find a general who would do a take in this war, so this war has lasted much longer than any of us ever dreamed it would. On July the 1st, 1863, in a quiet little town in Pennsylvania by the name of Gettysburg, our nation has suffered the worst battle of its history. And after 3 days of fighting in and around the village of Gettysburg, our nation has marked over 50,000 casualties. 50,000 Americans, north and south. In fact, it was reported to me that General Lee of the Confederate Army, simply taking his wounded away from this field, had a wagon train that was nearly 18 miles in distance. It was shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, it was decided that a portion of the battlefield should become a national cemetery. And so it was on the occasion of the dedication, November the 19th, 1863, I was asked, acting in my capacity as the chief executive of the nation, to deliver a few appropriate remarks. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as the final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, and that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Well, finally in March of last year, 64, I did succeed in finding a general who would take them to war. I suppose you could say I rediscovered General Grant. Last November, in the midst of all this chaos, we had an election. And I will tell you, I did not expect to be renominated. I did not ever dream I would ever be reelected. But for whatever reason, you, the people, have seen fit to leave me in this office, and you have bestowed upon me an honor which I shall be unremitting in my attempt to compensate. A few days ago, I received a telegram, the contents of which you're all happily familiar with. General Grant has met General Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia and has accepted the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia, which is the chief insurgent army in this rebellion. Finally, perhaps I should say hopefully, this terrible civil war is almost at an end. But again, I must caution you, we have a very difficult time ahead of us. Every day, more and more people in the North have a great anger towards the people in the South, and they're going to insist that they be punished for what they've done. But I will tell you, I will have no more of this bloody work. This is not a time for hatred. This is a time for healing. Now, I've already sent several suggestions to reconstruction of Congress. On several occasions, they've told me what I could do with my suggestion, but I'm...
Excuse me, I don't wish to interrupt you with your guests, but it is time that we were leaving. Miss Harris and Major Rathbone are waiting for us, and if we don't hurry, we'll be late.
Very well, Mother, I'll be with you in a moment. I was asked by a reporter, just the other afternoon, says, Mr. Lincoln, how's it feel to be reelected? How's it feel to be the president for a second term? And I told him that I was reminded of a man who had been tarred and feathered and ridden out of town on a rail when somebody asked him, well, how's it feel to be ridden out of town on a rail? His reply was, if it weren't for the honor of the darn thing, I'd just soon have walked. But if you'll excuse me, I'm engaged to go to the theater this evening. The public has been notified I'll be there, and I don't want to disappoint the public. My goodness, they ask so little, and sometimes there's so little I can give them. But if you will, do me a favor, each and every one of you, come and see me again in the morning. Good night.
The Lincolns arrived late at Ford's Theater that evening, April the 14th, 1865. The play, Our American Cousin, was already in progress, but the actors stopped the performance and led the audience in a standing ovation as the president and his party made their way to the presidential box, which had been festooned with red, white, and blue bunting for the occasion. The play resumed. Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln appeared to be enjoying the performance. Then suddenly there was the explosion of a gunshot at close range behind them. A cloud of blue smoke began filling the presidential box. Mary Lincoln looked up into her husband's face, saw his eyes slowly close and his head sink to his chest, suddenly realizing that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Throughout the long death vigil, which lasted until early the next morning, Mary Lincoln moved between states of wild hysteria and numbed shock. Repeatedly, she pleaded with her husband that he must live for her sake and the children, or that he must take her with him. Finally, at 7:22 a.m., April the 15th, Abraham Lincoln died without regaining consciousness. As Carl Sandburg would later so eloquently write, the pale horse had come to a deep river, to a far country, to a by and by from whence no man returns, had gone the child of Nancy Hanks and Tom Lincoln, a wilderness boy who found far lights and tall rainbows, whose name, even before he died, had become legend. Secretary of War Stanton is said to have uttered the words, "Now he belongs to the ages." Mary Lincoln lived on for 17 more years after that dreadful night. Many times over the course of those years, she would express her desire that she too could be allowed to die and be released from her torment. But there was more heartbreak yet to come for her. She lived to see her darling youngest son, Taddy, die slowly of tuberculosis at the age of 18. She faced public ridicule in the newspapers over her financial situation and abandonment and betrayal by people she had thought were her friends. Her behavior became increasingly more irrational and bizarre until finally, in May of 1875, her only surviving son, Robert, felt compelled to have her tried for insanity and confined to an institution. She was sent to Bellevue Place in Batavia, Illinois, where she spent only 4 months under the care of Dr. Richard J. Patterson. Her room was on the second floor of the institution, which indicated that she was not among the most severe cases there, and her treatment consisted mainly of rest, diversion, and the least amount of medication and restraint necessary. Although she was released after a relatively short period of time, she remained a very bitter woman, estranged from her son, and in poor physical health until the end of her life. She died on July 16, 1882, at the age of 63, at her sister Elizabeth's house in Springfield, Illinois, the same house where she and Mr. Lincoln had stood to be married so many years before. Undoubtedly, there were those who mourned for Mary Lincoln, but for her a wish had at last been granted. Now for her there would be no more partings, no more anguish to be endured, and no more tears to shed. She would at last be reunited with her angel boys and her beloved Mr. Lincoln. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for coming out this evening. If there's any question we could answer about Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln other than his nose problem, what is the Civil War, I suppose we could answer some questions. The state of Illinois up through 1865. What is a no-load mutual fund? How do you invest in real estate without any money?
What?
My wife would be delighted to answer them for you.
What?
Wouldn't you?
Someone is going to shoot you someday if you keep doing that.
I studied history. It won't happen here. That young lady.
What was your basis of getting started on this?
What was the basis? Well, strange enough, we were both in theater in the western suburbs out around Wheaton, Aurora, out in that area. And I got cast in a play as Mr. Lincoln.
Because of his physical resemblance. He's the right height, has the dark hair, had a beard and a mustache at the time. He always would get cast in parts like the judge, the doctor, the cowboy, that sort of thing. And because of his resemblance, he got cast in a play was auditioning that needed an Abraham Lincoln, so of course he got the part. Required him shaving the mustache, which was fairly traumatic because he'd had it for 30 years. But we figured, well, you know, it's only 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever the run of the play was, then you can grow it back in.
No, it's
There it
weird.
goes again. Anyway, but someone who saw him in that play approached him and asked him to come and take part in an historical pageant that they were putting together. And someone who saw him in the pageant asked him to come be in a parade. And about the 5th or 6th thing he got invited to, someone said, "Oh, can your wife come along as Mary?" So we borrowed costumes from our theater group and just showed up to look like them, except we discovered that when you do that, people will come up and ask you questions. And that's when we realized we were in trouble because we didn't know anything. He at least has a good excuse. He was born and raised in the South, but I'm from Illinois. I should know this stuff. So as we tell students in school, we had to do our homework. And we started researching and just to find the answers to the questions we were most frequently being asked. And it became one of these situations of neat stuff I found out while I was looking up something else. And one day we were sitting on the living room floor. We had papers and books strewn all over the place. And I looked at him and I said, "We're both actors. We have all this wonderful material here. Wouldn't it make a good script? So we wrote Evening with Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln, and over the years we've developed about 15 more programs. And it started out as sort of a hobby for us at first, and within a couple of years it had become a part-time business on the side in addition to our real jobs. And then in 1994 it became what we do for a living. If anyone had told us 21 years ago that you could make a living doing this, we would have thought they were nuts.
I still have my doubts.
But I do tell people that I'm glad he looks like Abraham Lincoln and not Grover Cleveland. No offense to Mr. Cleveland, I just don't think we could make a living portraying him. It's something about the personality and the persona of Abraham Lincoln. And we're obviously in a very good place to be portraying Lincoln. Not so popular in Alabama and Georgia, but in Illinois he's golden.
Well, he's popular in a different way.
Why didn't I move back to the Springfield house after he died? That's a very good question, and one that my son Robert and Judge Davis, who was the executor of the estate, also wanted to know. My reason for not moving back to the house was that it would be too painful for me there. There were so many memories in that house, and to go back there missing Mr. Lincoln, missing Eddie, missing Willie, would just have been too painful for me to go there.
Did you sell the house then?
No, it has stayed in the family until Robert donated it to the state of Illinois. We rented it out, and it continued to provide income for me over the years. But when I left the White House, I still had my two sons with me, Robert and Taddy, and we came to Chicago. We lived in Chicago for a number of years, which to me was close enough to go to Springfield to visit Mr. Lincoln's grave, and yet far enough away, as I put it, as to not be daily assaulted by scenes that would remind me of happier times.
Additionally,
Are there people in the bloodline who are alive now that were Robert's children's children?
Robert was the only one of our children, obviously, who lived to be a grown man. He did get married and had children. He had a son and two daughters. Unfortunately, his son died just before his 18th birthday, which left Robert without a male heir. Now, Robert himself actually lived to be 82 years old, which is only remarkable because his brothers all died so young. But Robert lived until 1926, and when he passed away, the name died with him. His daughters had children, but none of those children had children. Our last descendant was a man named Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, and when he passed away in December of 1985, the line was extinguished. Now, there are still relatives out there, cousins, primarily cousins, nieces, nephews, that kind of thing. Mr. Lincoln's parents had siblings, and he likes to say that the Todd family doesn't have a tree, it's a bush. My father, between my mother and my stepmother, my father had 16 children. So
it's a bush.
I meet people all the time who tell me that they're related to the Todds, and I don't dispute it because it's entirely possible. So, I mean, there are relatives out there, but no direct descendants, great-great-grandchildren, or anything along that line.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to work.